Alright, so now we're going to start editing. The first thing we need to do is deal with a little terminology. What we would call a clip in Final Cut or Avid is called a tile in Lightworks, and so I'm going to double click on this first tile here that I've imported to open it up in a viewer. Move the viewer over here, and you'll notice that spatially Lightworks is a little bit more loosey-goosey about where it puts things on the screen. That is, that you can put this viewer anywhere you like on the screen, and once I've decided that I like this location and this is where I want it to be, I'm just going to press the pin button in the upper right hand corner, and that pins the viewer to that location so that it doesn't move around all the time. The next thing I need to do is open and edit, which is Lightworks terminology for a sequence. And the third button down in the toolbar is the edit button, so I'm going to press that button and my edit appears. And of course it's called something generic like edit number 14, and so I'm going to replace that and just call it Matt's edit. Just like in any other program, I want the edit to be something reasonable. And now I'm going to mark some footage on my viewer. The J, K, and L keys work exactly the way that you would expect. The one thing that I found took a little getting used to coming from Final Cut and Avid is that if you press the space bar, it will play, but if you press the space bar again, rather than stopping, it will play faster. So I found it easier to just get used to using J, K, and L and get used to pressing K to stop. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to press play, and at the point just before the dog jumps off the sofa, there we go, I'm just going to go back up here, I'm going to press I to mark. Note that I didn't say mark in, and you'll see why in a minute. So I'm going to mark there, and then I'm just going to play down. And as I do, you'll notice that this white strip opens up between the blue point, which is where I hit the mark key, and the red point, which is where I am now. And so I haven't actually marked another point. I didn't mark out specifically. I just paused and stopped the playhead right here, but Lightworks has gone ahead and marked that section. So this is what Lightworks calls mark and park. That is, instead of actually marking an in and marking an out explicitly, I'm just going to mark one point, and then I'm going to go to the other point and just park the playhead right there. And if I do an insert edit, then you'll see that this clip winds up in the strip view, which is Lightworks terminology for a timeline. Now let me just undo. This little icon over here is undo. And I'm going to do the reverse. I'm going to clear my footage. So now I'm at the out point, and so I'm just going to hit the I key to mark again, but I'm going to play backwards until I reach what should be the in, which is where the dog's on the couch. And now again I'm going to pause. And you'll notice that if I go ahead and insert this into the timeline, that the last frame is in fact where the dog is at the door just as expected. So the mark can actually be either the in point or the out point depending on which way you go from that point. Now this begs the question, how do I back time and edit? Because if you only explicitly mark one point, how do I tell Lightworks that I actually want to go backwards from this out point? And the answer is, it's actually surprisingly simple. I'm just going to mark in the timeline, and then I'm going to play, and I'm going to park in the timeline. And you'll notice that it does the same thing. It puts the blue point where I marked, and then it spreads out to show me the region that's being marked when I play down. And I could do this the opposite way too, which is I could mark here at the end and play backwards to define the region that I want to be covered by this particular back time. And now in the viewer, I'm just going to clear my marks there, and I'm going to find the point that I want to be the end point. So again, I'm going to use the point just before the dog goes out the door. And now I'm going to press a special key called back time, and in my case I've assigned that to Shift F10. So if I press Shift F10, and I'm just going to turn off the audio tracks as well, this works exactly the way you'd expect, in that I will get an edit on the video and not on the audio tracks. So I'm just going to press Shift F10, and you'll notice that if I go back a frame to the end of that edit, that in fact the end of that edit is exactly where I had parked on the viewer before. Now another really interesting thing that Lightworks does is whenever I do an edit that removes footage, it takes that footage, puts it on the clipboard, and opens up that piece as a separate tile. And if I want, I can make that tile into a separate viewer. If I minimize it and drag it into a bin, then I can use that as a clip for later. So anytime I cut stuff out, it'll open it up as a clipboard, and then I can just drag the tile into a bin and use it later. Now I want to demonstrate something interesting about the way Lightworks does split edits. So I'm going to open up a new tile. On my strip, I'm going to mark here where this edit point is. And then I'm going to turn the video off, and I'm going to drag the playhead down here, and I'm going to mark over here on the audio tracks. And you'll notice that we can tell that it's been marked separately because there's a mark here on the video tracks and here on the audio tracks. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to park all the way at the head of the sequence. And I'm going to turn on all of my tracks. And now I'm going to go to my clip, and I'm just going to park over here, and I'm going to do a replace edit, which is Lightworks speak for an overwrite. And you'll see that when I do that, it replaces from the park up to the mark here on the video track, but up to the mark here on the audio track. So that's how you would do a split replace in Lightworks. Now the next thing we're obviously going to want to do is we're going to want to save this edit. Now Lightworks has saved this entire screen configuration as a room, so if I exit the project using this icon in the lower right and then re-enter it, everything is left exactly where I put it. So there isn't really any need to constantly save these things, but if I want to save this edit, I'm going to minimize it, and so it becomes a tile, and then I can take this tile and drag it into a bin. And obviously I could have a bin of a bunch of sequences. So now when I open up my sequence again, you'll notice it has a blue border, which means that it's actually a source and not a sequence. So if I open up another edit, I can mark and park on my sequence and edit this sequence into the next sequence, and it keeps the edits exactly the way they were. What's really nice about this is it reminds me a little bit of Avid's function where you can view the source timeline. So for instance, I can use this icon to open up the strip view. So now I can see the timeline of this edit even though I'm using it as a source for another edit. Now if I want to make further edits to it, all I have to do is press the record button here, and now the border turns red, and now it becomes an edit that I can use to edit more things into, just as you would expect. But I think this idea of being able to use any edit as a source is fantastic. And in fact, I can do the same thing for any source clip. So I can take this other source clip, open it up, and you'll notice that there's a record button right here. So I can actually turn on this record button, open up the strip view, and I can make edits into this source clip, at which point it becomes an edit. And once it's an edit, I can use it exactly the way you would expect to use that. So that's a really interesting thing. If you have one clip that would become the basis for an edit, Lightworks easily allows you to turn a source clip into an edit and an edit into a source clip.